The grill is shot. The chairs are held together by optimism. And what happened to the rug? Sounds like your outdoor setup is not ready for patio season. Fix it all with Wayfair. Shop Wayfair for grills, rugs, furniture, and more. With 20 million 5-star reviews, room of choice delivery, and expert setup on qualifying orders, it's never been easier to do more for less. Get 10% off your first eligible purchase. Hurry to wayfair.com or download the app now.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
In the dawn's like boots on the ground, the leaves crunch beneath as we head down. There's something about the woods and for the beast that quietly heed the call. Won't you join me on this trail, dear, where the deer stand tall and the air so clear?
You're listening to my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry.
Big Buck Registries.
Big Buck Registries.
Big Buck Registries.
The Big Buck Registries Deer Hunt Podcast.
Before we jump into today's show, I've got a few things I want to share with you. Big Buck Registry has built a set of free tools designed to help you time your hunts better. DeerMove gives you a daily deer movement forecast combining weather, pressure, temperature changes, moon phase if you toggle it in, your choice, daylight hours, and rut timing into a simple movement score. DeerMoon strips it down even further, a fast, moon phase only outlook for hunters who track lunar patterns. And when it comes to conditions, Deer Hunt Weather delivers a hunting-focused forecast with current conditions, weather alerts, hourly detail, and a 10-day outlook. No subscriptions, no clutter, just practical tools built by hunters for hunters. Free, simple, accurate, and all you need is a zip code. Check them all out at bigbuckregistry.com and be in the woods when the deer are on their feet. For Deer Hunter Weather, it's bigbuckregistry.com/deerhuntweather. For the deer movement prediction by weather factors, it's bigbuckregistry.com/deermove. And for the weather for the day, hour, and week visit, bigbuckregistry.com/weather. If you've got a story from this season, a hunt that meant something, a lesson learned, or just a moment you'll never forget, call 724-613-2825 and leave a voicemail. Or head over to bigbuckregistry.com/speakpipe and record it right from your phone. We share listener stories on upcoming episodes, and we'd love to include yours. And finally, a quick word about how this show keeps going. The Big Buck Registry runs on the value for value model. Listeners like you who find value in what we do and choose to return a little value back. If you'd like to support the show, visit bigbuckregistry.com/value. Every contribution helps us stay independent and keep these conversations alive. You know, every once in a while I'll go back through the archives and listen to an old episode. And sometimes it's because I'm looking for a specific piece of information. Sometimes it's because a listener mentions an episode they remember. And every now and then it's because I simply want to see how well a conversation has held up over time. That's what happened with this one. This episode was originally recorded back in 2013 with deer processor Al Gambardella. And as I listened to it again recently, I found myself thinking about just how much the hunting world has changed over the last 13 years. Back then, most of us weren't carrying around a phone loaded with hunting apps. Social media wasn't flooded with wild game recipes and deer processing videos. There weren't countless YouTube channels showing every step of breaking down a whitetail from start to finish. A lot of what we learned came from family members, hunting buddies, local butchers, or experienced processors who had spent years behind a cutting table. Fast forward to today, and things look very different. Hunters have embraced the field-to-table movement in a way that few people could have imagined back then. More hunters are processing their own deer, grinding their own burger, making sausage, vacuum sealing meat, experimenting with aging techniques, and taking an active interest in every step that takes place between the moment a deer is recovered and the moment venison reaches the dinner table. At the same time, we've had to adapt to new challenges. Chronic wasting disease has expanded into many more regions. Hunters now have to think about testing programs, carcass transportation regulations, disposal recommendations, and a growing body of scientific research that simply wasn't part of everyday conversation for many deer hunters when this episode was first recorded. But what struck me most while listening back through this interview wasn't what had changed, it was what hadn't. Because when you listen to Al talk about field care, cooling a deer properly, keeping things clean, paying attention to details, avoiding shortcuts, and treating every animal with respect, you realize those lessons haven't aged at all. The equipment may have changed, the regulations may have changed, the science may have changed, but great venison still starts with the same fundamentals it always has. A deer has to be handled properly. A deer has to be cooled quickly. The meat has to be cared for correctly, and the hunter has to take responsibility for what happens after the shot. In a lot of ways, that's really what this conversation is about. It's not just about butchering. It's not just about knives, grinders, or cutting tables. It's about stewardship. It's about honoring the animal by making the best possible use of it. And it's about understanding that the work doesn't end when the hunt is over. So whether you're somebody who processes every deer yourself, somebody who uses a local processor every season, or somebody preparing to handle your first deer this fall, I think you're going to find plenty of value in this conversation. Let's jump back into the Big Buck Registry archives and revisit our conversation with deer processor Al Gambardella.
I appreciate you joining us. This is our deer cutting episode, and I thought of no one better than yourself to join us to fill us in on all the do's and don'ts of deer cutting. What's the number one most important thing that we should know? Perfect.
The most important thing is it starts in the field. It really is, the major part of, how your processing is going to turn out. You, of course, there is instances where, game has to be left overnight. The most important thing is, if you take the animal, you see the animal go down, sometimes you're hunting with friends or whatever, and you want to give them time, they want to hunt also. You don't want to get down. You don't want to, ruin their hunt, whatever. So, you do let the animal sit. Of course, it getting to it, as quick as possible, because you want the cool down process to start. You field dress it. You want to get everything out, actually the urine can, the intestinal tract, and you want to make sure that it's done, nice and clean. You take your time. The biggest problem that I've come across is deer that are perfectly hit but are ruined in the field. They bust the gut sac, it's all over everything, and at that point it becomes a real problem. The more it sits in there, the bacteria, it gets into the tenderloins. That's number one. It soaks into the cavity. It needs to be whopped out immediately.
Gotcha. Now, Al, what makes you an authority on the subject matter? You've run your own deer cutting service before, correct?
I run the service for maybe 12, 13 years for the outside, for the public. I've been cutting for myself for 20 years. Basically, I started doing it. I was self-taught, and I had a good friend of mine who was in the business who kind of helped me along. The biggest problem, and it really wasn't a problem, but, I was very picky. And, when I went to different processing facilities, I just couldn't find the job that I wanted. I was very picky as far as, cleaning, as far as, getting as much meat as I possibly could get off of it and packaging it, which the three most important things is, you want to get that animal to a cooler, first thing. You want to make sure the butcher has a cooler. I've always had a walk-in cooler. I was able to hang the deer for a week, and then, process it myself, it's also rewarding, but, that's basically how I got into the business of doing it. Other people had seen, how I did it, and, they started asking me, hey, can you put for me? And that's how kind of, we started.
Gotcha. So you basically, there was, you had friends and others that realized that you knew what you were doing. Eventually that led into a deer cutting service that you offered. Al, where are you from? Okay. And how many, I think you had told me that your shop is not up and running right now, and that you want to focus more on hunting this past year. When you were up and running, how many deer were you running through your shop?
Oh, well, I could cut anywhere from 40 to 50 to well over 100. It was just, what I wanted to take in. I mean, to tell you the truth, the word of mouth was incredible. And just, people telling other people and liking, the end result. But yeah, I usually would run through, I could do anywhere, pick and choose from 40 to well over 100 if I want to go full bore.
Okay. So in a typical season, you'd run through 100 deer. And do you have any help usually?
Yeah. I had a friend of mine, Tom Pentrid. I started out by myself, just doing maybe 7 or 8 like the first season, and then it jumped quickly. We started picking up other clients, and I took a friend of mine on that helped me out.
Gotcha. Now, if you could walk us through, like you mentioned that the first thing that is the best thing to do is to get the animal cooled down as fast as possible, get all the innards out, make sure you clean out the cavity correctly, get out all the intestines and the urine sac, and just clean it right out as much as possible, correct? Okay. From that point forward, what should we do next once that's done?
Once that's done, you want to get it to, a cooler. It depends on, where you are and what the temperature is. I mean, of course, if, the temperature outside is, below 40 degrees, then, that's all well and good. You can keep it in a barn. You want to keep it out of direct sunlight because direct sunlight, sun rays, just like anything else, it's like an icicle. It could be 20 degrees out, 25 degrees out. But yeah, you look and you have, icicles are melting because they're being hit by the sun's rays because the sun's rays is actually heating them up. So you want to keep it out of the sun. You want to get it to a cooler because, the optimum temperature is 38 degrees. And you want to get it in there and actually, those first 4 to 6 hours, play an important role, getting that meat cooled down. And then that also starts the breaking down process.
Right.
Which is actually the most important part.
So if you live in a climate that runs north of 40 degrees during the hunting season, then you really want to turn to a cooler of some sort if you can.
Yeah, walk-in cooler. You could pack the body cavity with ice. Once you pack a body cavity with ice, is one of the key things to do is get the ice bags in there like a garbage bag or something that's not going to saturate the cavity because your T-loins are very, very porous. When the tenderloins, they'll soak up anything in the body cavity. That's also another important thing that I didn't mention is if you can get them out in the field. If you can bring a clean bag with you and get those out, because you don't want the deer sitting on its back and there's always pooling blood inside of it. And it'll get inside those tenderloins, and believe me, you'll taste it.
Okay. I'd like to get into some of the cuts in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you a couple more questions about temperature. Once you've got it hanging somewhere, let's say you don't have a cooler, but you're south of 40 degrees. Is there a temperature that's too cold?
Oh, you don't want to freeze the meat. That's something you don't want to do. You don't want it to freeze because then you're stopping, the breaking down process. You want that meat to be unfrozen. So you don't want, temperatures, below 32 degrees or, anywhere, lower than 32 for periods of time and that meat starts to freeze. You're doing the reverse. You stop the process. The meat is frozen at that point. I mean, it'll preserve it, but you're not getting the full effect of what you're trying to do. And that you're trying to get that bacteria in the meat or the enzyme in there to start loosening that tissue up and, loosening up the muscle and everything. And that's what that temperature is there for. If it's frozen, then that stops the process. It's just like taking a deer and taking it home and cutting it up after, 7 or 8 hours when it's hanging and then throw it in the freezer. You've done the opposite. There's nothing wrong with the meat, but you haven't, what you're looking for.
Okay. So basically, if you're north of 40 degrees, you're welcoming in a bacterial growth and decay of meat. Anything too cold, and you're stopping the natural aging process to where it kind of almost naturally tenderizes itself. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Okay. Gotcha. All right, Dusty, what do you have for questions for Al in the pre-cut stage of the deer?
Al, a lot of people, they want to say that infection areas are okay for the processor to go ahead and cut the meat. What's your opinion on if you get into skinning out a deer and you run into some infection, say from a previous wound or arrow shoot that didn't penetrate? What do you do when you run into infection? Is that a instant no good for the meat? What's your opinion on that?
Well, it depends. It depends how far it got. And of course, if it's green and, has an odor to it, it's a touchy situation. I mean, you have to cut away from it. Just like, when they operate on a person, that infection, you have to stay away from it. You have to cut far enough back so that you're clear of it. A lot of times we do get deer that I've had we get deer with arrow lodged in their shoulder, but at that point, usually they're grown over, they've healed up, and you're able to cut around them. But anything, even like, the wound area itself, you get the blood clot, and also you'll get it called marbling. It'll trace through. You have to cut all that out far back. You have to go that extra mile just to make sure that you're not even close to that. Because you can get sick, and you will, especially from anything that's a marble blood clot. So you do have to cut that out. You have to be very careful. You want to stay as far away from that infected area as possible. You have to basically.
Excellent. Another quick question on getting into the first stages of cutting a deer. You've skinned it out. You let it hang. How long are you letting your meat hang? What's a recommended period of time, as far as days, that you want to allow that meat to hang for? The breakdown of the meat, the muscles, and the best tenderization. You got a set day that you like to let them hang for and then process?
Well, I think what we did this year is, because unfortunately, when I was processing deer for people, you're getting in numbers of deer at a time. You're getting three. You could have 3, 4 deer come in one day, and 5, 6, 7 deer come in the next day. You have to get on it. Unfortunately, when I ran the business, I had to tell guys, hey, once the cooler started to fill up, I had to start, processing the deer. So usually it could be anywhere from 2 to 3 days before I processed it. But the optimum was 7 days, and the option was given, if they wanted to do the 7-day period, they would have to pay for a cooler storage. But 7 days. Actually, this year we took a couple of deer and actually did them. One we did after, 48 hours, and the other one we let set a full 7 days. And it was considerably noticeable on the 7-day cut, the condition of the meat, and on the same deer. Remember, the same age class too. So if you can let it sit for, 5 to 7 days, that's great. That's actually perfect. You could even let it go even longer than that. There's guys who let the deer hang 8 to 10 days, but you just got to be careful as far as, when it starts to get into that longer period, that, you're not getting into a point where, the meat now is going in the opposite direction. The optimum time, I would say, would be 7 days.
Okay.
Under perfect conditions. That's 30 days.
Right. Got excellent. Yep.
Go ahead, Dustin.
What's the most common mistake that's made or left in a deer that's, somebody brings to you that they've, they bring it in, they say, I properly field dressed it, and you get in cutting on it. What's something that would be a little pointer that a hunter could take to the woods that, what's something that's commonly left in there that kind of an unnoticeable area?
Well, commonly left in there, I'd have to say, a lot of times you get the intestinal tract left in there. Sometimes you get the urine sac left in there. Another thing is the biggest problem that I've come across, and I might have mentioned it earlier, is they penetrate the gut sac. And, the other thing is, too, is when they take the deer out of the wood, they're not careful. A lot of guys, the inside of the deer is filthy. I mean, going through mud, it's going through, there's leaves, it's, it's not sanitary. You don't know what you're dragging through. You got pulled up water, and you're dragging that deer through stagnant water. Who knows has what for bacteria? You know what I mean? But the biggest problem is I have to say that I've come across, because I've seen so many deer that were just perfectly hit, and what winds up happening is they break that gut, or they even break the urines. I've seen that a few times, and it's a distinct smell. You know it's been done, especially once you get inside the cooler. It's in an enclosed area. That's the biggest thing. I would have to say, just take your time. It's really important to make sure that you take your time and you get everything out without puncturing anything.
Yep. That's a good point there, Al, is that just because you made a good shot and just because you did a good job cleaning the deer out, if you're doing a traditional drag and you're not putting the deer on a four wheeler, you're not putting it in a cart or something like that to keep it out of the mud and leaves, there's a lot of just natural bacteria that's out there and just on the ground. So if you start dragging it through swamps and muds, there's a lot of other bacteria that will quickly be introduced to your meat along the way. Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah, and the favorite part, everybody loves to say it, is their tenderloins. And those things are, they're very porous. And, anything that gets into that body cavity soaks right into them. They're like a sponge. That's why anything that gets into that body cavity, it depends on where you're hunting. Some guys, like you said, have four-wheelers. They can pick them up, put them on their four-wheeler. If they can, get that thing to a hole somewhere and just, don't spray it out with a heavy jet stream, because you're doing the opposite. But if you get a nice flow in their water and, clean it all out, and then get your T-loins out. I mean, I have guys that bring me deer that are impeccable, They get them home, they clean them out. And also, once they do rinse out their body cavity, they blot it out. They'll take paper towels and they'll blot out the inside. So, it dries off nicely. But that's really the key thing.
Gotcha. Here's a quick question that I had for you. Is it, and I think this is kind of a debate amongst all hunters, is it important to wear gloves when cleaning out a deer?
That's a very good question. You get a gut shot deer and, you got bacteria, you get, you got cut on your hands or something, and that gets introduced, inside your bloodstream. Who knows what can happen? I couldn't tell you. I'm not a doctor. I don't know, but I do know that, feces and urine and anything like that is not something that you want, just like you would treat, another person if they got hurt, you would take and wear rubber gloves. It's probably a very good idea. And I have to tell you, through all my years of hunting, I've cutted a lot of deer. I've never used gloves, which probably.
Okay. Yeah. I prefer not to use gloves. I don't know why. Just something about it. Dusty, how do you clean your deer out in the field?
I used to not, and I had a friend of mine who is a taxidermist and got an infection while working on an animal, a deer head, and he got an infection and had to have some of his thumb cut off from this infection. So then after that point, I said, why not? I just throw them I got a bag that I carry my knife and my binoculars and a couple calls and some scent. I just go ahead and throw 2 pair of rubber gloves in there, and I got them with me when I go to the field. So, I kind of recommend it. Not that more or less infection, but just the fact that if you cut yourself or you have a cut from, let's say you cut yourself at work and that's in that blood, that's naturally going to get in there. And, usually you're within probably an hour and a half of home. You can wash it out. But there's always that chance once that blood dries in that wound that you're going to pick up an infection that the common peroxide or something can't draw out of there.
Gotcha. Okay. Al, go ahead, Al.
I was just going to say, it does make, he makes a great point. Cause like I said too, is when the paramedics come and they're working on somebody, a human being, that's the first thing they do. So you would think that any bacteria from, that the animal has in it, bloodstream or, wherever it was hit through, you puncture the liver, what's in the liver, that's not good. So
right.
It's a great point.
So let's go back to the cooler and the hanging. We've successfully shot a deer. We've harvested it. We've cleaned it out in the right way. We've got it back to the shop. We were hanging it in a cooler or a garage out of the sunlight. In 40-degree weather or less, somewhere around 38 is the optimal temperature. Now we've got a deer hanging in our garage, and we want to start. It's 7 days later. Let's say it's 7 days later. Is it important to take the hide off of the deer, or can we leave the hide on the deer while it's aging?
Yeah, you could basically do it either way. You could take the hide off or you could leave the hide on. I've always left the hide on because it's the thin skin, the animal. The body cavity's open, so the air is circulating through the inside muscle, through the outside, of the animal. And you'll notice too, when you skin it, if it left, for 6 or 7 days, the cold air will penetrate. I mean, the meat, it's very cold. It's actually really, really not tough the process, but your figure do get cold. I mean, especially if you're wearing just a pair of latex gloves. But yeah, the hide, we've always left the hide on. You could take the hide off. Some guys, they'll use what's called like a cheesecloth bag over the top. If you don't, and you just expose it to the air, what's going to happen is your outside is going to dry now, and you'll have to skim that off.
Gotcha. Okay. When you're skinning the deer and taking off the hide, 7 days later, and you're ready and you left the hide on to cure. Tell me about the knives that you're using to take the hide off. Do you have is it a long knife, short knife? What are some of the tools of the skilled master here that would make your job easier?
Well, we've always used the short skinning knife. Actually, when you're skinning game, just like a taxidermist will tell you, the smaller the knife, the better. But you're removing the skin, loosening it up and getting it off. You don't want your conventional, an 8-inch or a 6-inch butchering knife to do that. A small skinny knife, a round nose knife that works perfectly. Wyoming knives, you can even use those. Those are small enough. They take it off nice. You want a nice sharp knife, and you want a small knife. Nothing large, just a small skinning knife. That I couldn't tell you off the top of my. I got a Schrage, I think. SEHE 2.5-inch skinny knife that I used for years. Probably that knife I used probably the beginning since I started. That actually worked perfect.
The knife that I use, I think the blade is about 3.5 inches, and I go through it much faster than I would if I took out my 6-inch blade. Just the smaller knife just seems to be more efficient for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, you're only using the tip of that knife. That's all that's being used. It's not like when you're cutting up or you're processing your meat and you're cutting steaks and you're using, an 8-inch knife where, you're using the bulk of that knife, to cut through, wherever it may be. It's the top round, the bottom round, or the rump. But you're using all of that blade. And you're skinning, you're just using the tip of that knife. And that's what you need to be nice and sharp. So it doesn't have to be a very long knife. It just has to be very sharp, nice, round nose, go right through it.
Gotcha. Dusty, what type of utensils do you use when you're cutting out the hide off of a deer?
It's kind of crazy, but this is what I do. I take and early season, I buy a pack of brand new razor blades. I take a piece of leather, wrap it halfway up the razor blade, and I skin with a leather glove on. And there's no better edge than a laser edge off of a razor blade to keep an edge, and be sharp from the start. So as I go through, if I run into a dull razor blade, I just swap them out. I've got 3 or 4 laying there. Most of the time we skin out 4 or 5 deer at once, and I just go right on with the razor blade.
Gotcha. Seems like that would make sense. Al, does that seem like a good? You're doing 4 or 5 deer at a time. Have some razor blades around.
Oh yeah, because it sounds like I said, all you're using is that that little bit of that blade. That's all you need. So what's doing it? Just get on there and you're separating that membrane and
Yeah, the first couple times was kind of interesting. I had an elderly gentleman tell me that you got to be careful with it. It just seems like once I do it with a razor blade like that, and I got so used to it, it's really fast because you actually, you're just skinning your fingertips and your hand right down through there. You're pulling with one hand and cutting with the other, and it just seems like it's pretty quick for me.
Oh yeah, and it's got to be razor sharp. So you're just dipping everything as you're going down, and it should come right off. I can definitely see it. On it sharp, that's what you need. To sharpen it, you're not using, like you said, you're using just that small portion, and that's just separating the membrane, as you're going down, and like you said, pulling with one hand. And
yeah, with a knife, it seems like that you don't need no pressure when you're skinning. And when I ran a knife, I seem to want to catch the hide here and there, and that obviously, if somebody's going to do tanning or anything with their hide, they don't want to nick that. So the razor blade seems to be quick and fast. And when I do a cape job, the razor blade is right there. And, you're in close quarters anyway when you're caping one out to do a shoulder mount. It seems like that razor blade runs right around. You can pull the skin down and really get into it, real quick, real sharp. And that's just what works for me,
Gotcha.
Oh, yeah. And you don't have all that extra blade that you might wind up, like you're saying, cutting the hide with it.
Exactly. Al, so now that we've got the deer kind of caped down, how far down do you go before you cut the hide completely off and sever the head from the body? How far down should we go?
Oh, I go right to the chin. I go all the way down, right to the chin, and that's where I cut it off.
The chin?
We go all the way down, right to the chin of the deer.
Okay, gotcha. And about where do you take the head off of the body?
Right there, right at the chin. You get in there. You could actually even, 2 ways you could do it. If you get down low enough and you get in between the vertebrae, you could just pop it. You can actually turn the head, and spin it, and you can actually break it. On most animals, you can't. Even your biggest buck, you get in between that vertebrae there, with the knife. You cut all the way through. Or what you could do too is you could take a pair of loppers and then you can cut it, there. The only problem is with anything like that lopper or whatever you use to cut that off has to be sanitary. It has to be clean. And you don't want to grab that out of your shed, after somebody's been cutting poison ivy with it or something, and it's been laying around and God knows what, and start cutting legs and heads off, and introduce something to the meat.
Right. Should we have a separate set of tools for doing all the work on the deer from all our other stuff?
Yeah. See, I'm glad you mentioned that. The number one thing is when we're in the cooler and we're skinning and quartering, the knives that we use in there never make it to the shop. Never make it to the stainless steel table where we're doing our final processing. Everything we use is in there, and there's separate knives that we use that will never go in the cooler. You got to remember too is when you're skinning, like anything else, there's tarsal gland, there's all kinds of stuff, and we actually shift gloves also. Once we're done getting the hide off the animal, those gloves come off that we've had on.
Okay, so the stuff in the field stays in the field, and then it goes into a real butchering processing area, and nothing crosses the line for the most part, except for the animal.
Yeah. You have to keep everything separated. You also have to keep a close eye, especially when we were doing it, because we were getting animals in that were, partially, stomach shot, and that there too. It's around your hands. You can't avoid it on the hide. But yes, you got to be real careful. Sometimes what you'll have to do too is, midstream you might have to wash a knife. You know what I mean? Especially if you're doing something like that. Sometimes people want their tenderloins regardless. You could tell them to you blue in the face, I will need it. I'm not taking them, I'll give them to you if you want, but I've done that on several occasions. But you go in there now with that knife and cut out that T-loin, and there was the stomach was breached or whatever, it gets on the knife. So you got to just make sure that you keep an eye on everything you do, and, you change your gloves after you skin. And I know it seems tedious, and that was the only thing with us. We were that way. So for us, processing deer didn't just take an hour. You know what I mean? It took 3.5 hours on an average doe, 2 guys. To do too is the cleaning process. And so before and after, you have to clean those utensils after you're done. And then you say, okay, I cleaned them. I got my deer. I'm going to start. And that's the wrong thing. You have to clean those knives again. They've been sitting, ours stay contained. All our knives go into stainless steel pans that are covered, but still you have to clean again, because you don't know, what's formed on the surface. You have to clean with a bleach solution, which you can get that on the internet. If you look up, it'll show you the amount you need to mix with what amount of water, and that's solid surface, and they're all different, stainless steel surface as far as what you should be using, because also with the bleach solution, you can use too much. So you want to make sure that you're using the right cleaning solution, and you have to clean your equipment before and after.
And before, right? So before you start, after you're done, before you start, right?
We're really, really particular on cleaning. That's what an hour we would spend, cleaning our stuff. We were done butchering the deer, and then we would, clean it again, at the starting process. You want to start out,
Right. So, okay. So now we're clean. Everything's been hung. It's the right temperature. We're now down to the carcass. Where do you start?
Where do you start? You're going to start naturally. You're going to take your T-loins out if they haven't been taken out. Those are fairly simple to take out. What you want to do is you want to just look at them, and you could see the form of the T-loin. Any fat or anything that's on them, and, in front of them, you want to take that off. I'm going to be talking to you like, your per deer.
Yes, please.
So you want to remove all that. And then you're going to have that spinal column. It separates the two. What you want to do is run that blade down and along it, all the way down towards the head area of the deer. You're going in that direction, and you'll see where it ends. And then you run it up, and it'll go up into the hind quarter. And if you run your hands on the T-loin as you're bringing the knife out, up, you'll feel where it buttons into the hind quarter.
Okay. So it's like a muscle group. You'll see a break of some sort.
Yeah. Well, you'll feel that where it thins out, and that's where you want to cut it. I mean, yeah, you might have a tiny little 1/2-inch piece or whatever that stays up in there, but that's where it ties in. That's where the muscle group connects. And what you want to do is you cut across that, and then you just start pulling down the tenderloin. And especially if the deer's been hung, it'll start to fall out. You'll notice that. You won't really have to put a lot of pressure, but it'll start to fall out, and you just start nipping behind it, because now you'll see that rib cage behind it. You'll see where it connects, and you just keep nipping until it all rolls out, and it'll roll right out for you. And then you take those and you separate them, whether you bring in a pan with you, a dish, or we always separated those. We would put them in a stainless steel pan.
Tenderloin and the backstrap are different. The tenderloin's on the inside.
Exactly. The tenderloin is on the inside. Those are the loins of the animal. Yeah. And they're on the inside. Those are the smaller version if you wanted to compare them to your backstrap or your ribeye is what they're conventionally called, because they sit on both sides of the outside of the rib cage. And if you actually were to look, say you look down the animal and you cut the hind quarters off, they would look like two eyes. We set the eyes, with the spine being the nose, the center. That's why they'll call the rib.
Gotcha. All right. So we've taken out the tenderloins. Then we go to the ribeye.
Now, what I do is I start up at the hind quarter, and you'll see where the hind quarter tapers in. And what I do right there, too, is I kind of loosen up. You'll see what looks like a flank piece that comes across. Well, you see that hind round out and go into the spinal cord. You kind of want to follow that with a knife. And there is a groove in there, and you can cut across that to the spinal column. And that's where I start. I do that actually on both sides, the left and the right side. And you'll feel it. If you're a little off, but you'll feel to where it goes in there and that knife just slides in between, the vertebrae and it'll go right in. Then the next step is to run the knife down the spinal column from the hind quarter. You're going to follow the spine. You're going to stay tight to it, almost like filleting a fish. You're going to stay tight to that. And you're going to run that down all the way through and all the way through the neck into where you cut it off. That's where Dusty was saying. Because that backstrap is going to tuck into that shoulder, and that's actually the best part of your ribeye is that part. It's not your hind quarter end.
Oh, is that right?
Where it tucks in.
So the tail of the ribeye is the reverse. It's not towards the tail; it's towards the front.
It tucks in behind that shoulder blade, and then once you follow that spine on both sides of the spine. What you're going to notice, too, is, and if you get your hand, there's a membrane on the top of that backstrap. You may have to nip it a little with the knife, but it's very easy to see. There may be a nice fat layer if it's, later in the year, and, especially if it's a big deer. He's going to have a big fat layer on there. What you want to kind of do is tuck your hand in between the fat layer and the top of that backstrap. And then what I do is I'll run my hand all the way down into the shoulder blade, and it'll separate that membrane from your backstrap. And the tougher part of that membrane is going to be, of course, the hind quarter, because you may have a real good layer of fat. You might not be able to even get your hand in there. It might be too tough to break it. I'll commonly break it. I'll stick my hands in between it and rotate upward towards the hind quarter and break. If you can't, you can just nip away at that membrane till you clear the ribeye. You'll see where it, bends on the opposite side, of the spine. Then what I do is I go in at the top there and I loosen it from the top down, and I follow the rib cage back towards the outside of the deer and down towards its belly side and loosen it up, and it'll start to fall out, especially on an aged deer. You'll start to notice it come out. All you're doing is following that contour. You're following the contour of the bone, and then, with the bone, and the meat where it meets. You're following that, and you'll notice it. You might be a little high, your first time or whatever, and then you dig a little deeper, and then it'll start to fall out. And then, like Dusty had said, when you get down towards the shoulder, you want to keep going. And actually, what I'll do is I'll actually have that ribeye now in your hand. It's long. You've gotten it. What you can do is pull downward toward the neck region, and it should pull all the way out, especially if the deer is staged. If not, you might have to go in there and nip it a little. But if you've done it right, you'll notice that you have the tail end of that backstrap, and it's very thin when it comes out. You don't want to cut it. If you cut it off prematurely, then you're going to see it thick. It tapers. You make that taper. So you want that thin end, and then you're going to repeat that on the opposite side.
Okay.
I think that's a pretty common problem that somebody doing their own cutting. Maybe it's your first time, and you get down on that backstrap or ribeye, either way you call it, you get down that shoulder blade. It's a common mistake to cut that off right there, because you don't realize that that's not the end of it. Actually, you're cutting off the best part of the whole ribeye is down by the shoulder blade where it thins out. Is that correct, Al?
Yeah, it is common. I mean, so you want to pull that and just keep pulling and pulling and pulling, and actually, you can pull it out. You can't pull it out of there. If you separated the membrane with your hand, like I said, in the beginning, you can pull that right out. Pushing downward, keeping downward pressure on it, you can yank that thing right out. There might be times where you might not, and you just get deep in there because what you're doing is it's no harm. There's no foul. What are you going to do if you cut too much? So you're into some neck meat, I'd rather lose the neck meat than lose the...
Right. Gotcha. All right. So through the backstrap, where do you go next?
Okay, your back straps are done. You've repeated the same, on both sides, left and right side of the animal. Then we take the shoulder blade off. And what we'll do here in taking the shoulder blade off is we don't just take the pure blade. We take a wide sweep. We sweep deep into the rib cage, which is all your flank. And you want to sweep through that and come down, and you'll notice that you'll hit the blade of the shoulder. You want to stay tight. You just staying tight to your rib cage. And you keep going and working that until you get to your neck. Now it's optional. You can sweep right to your neck and you can follow it right to the neck bone and you can take the neck meat off too with it. Or you can cut, and then this is a tough part because it's not really very distinct, but you'll see the overlap from the neck to the shoulder. And if you break that, then you can separate the shoulder with the flank on it from the neck. Want to save the neck for something else. But that's where your typical wound hit is too. And it takes time. But once you start to realize, how to do it and what you're doing is if that thing's been shot behind the shoulder, you want to start, of course, closer to the blade. And you want to stay ahead of the clotting and ahead of any marbling. And it's kind of easy to do while and throwing that on top of a table. And spreading it on the table. You could actually stay ahead of the wound. You just have to start closer to the shoulder blade. I won't get into any other type of hit where you get bone fragments and stuff like that, then, you're in for a chore. You're going to have to separate it piece by piece as you're going along. The best thing to do is save that piece for last on your...
Gotcha. All right. So we've taken off the shoulder blades on both sides. What do you do with the shoulder blade? You take it off and put it on the table for processing?
In the cooler, to transport back inside, and then it'll go to the table. Once that's done, especially if it's your first time doing it and you're not tight to anything, go around the cavity. Go around what's left of the, the rib cage. Go around and look. You'll have flank there. That you maybe you're not caught. You have pieces of the neck that maybe you left on. You could nip it. And generally sometimes we will do that. There'll be pieces here and there, especially if the animal was shot a certain way and we really had to go around marbling and we had to go around the blood spot and everything. We'll find pieces that are good. We'll take the extra effort to, nitpick some stuff because we know that, okay, this guy's going to lose, some meat. So that's what you want to do. You want to go over that, make sure that's done. Then the next thing to do is right where the hind quarter connects to that spinal cord where you took your back straps out. Is right there. You'll see that void. And that's what you want to do is you probably have to take a pair of loppers. You can't break it. You cut in between, your vertebrae, your rib cage up there, and then you mental pressure pushing it upward. Depends on the size of the animal too. I'm talking basically on your average size doe. You get a bigger buck, you'll have to probably cut through it. Bone saw through it. Or if you have a clean pair of loppers that you bought from day one, that's all you use for it. You'll lop, and then you can just put that in your tractor.
Okay. All right. So we're basically left with neck meat still, and we've got the hindquarters. So do you do anything with the neck meat?
Yeah. We strip the neck, or sometimes I get a lot of guys that want the neck whole. They use it for roasts, and there's also a lot of good crock pot recipes for it. That's the best that I've heard. Typically, what we'll do is we'll bone it out. We'll bone out the neck, and we'll use it for burger. That's typically what it's used for. We'll grind it. It is painstaking. That a lot of membrane in the neck region, so you can go through it, clean it up, and you can grind it, clean it as best as you possibly can, and then you grind it, into ground meat. Some guys like to keep it, and they even use it in a pop. People say, no, just bone it out, leave it to the side, and they claim if they let it sit long enough that.
If you're going to clean up the meat on the neck, how much detail should I do it, getting rid of all the connective tissues and the membranes and all that stuff?
Oh, you want to be in great detail, when you're doing it, because you don't want any of that left. If you springy, so it's a very tough region, just because of the tissue and the membrane. You want to get as much of that as you can off. Really, if you're using it to grind, you want it as clean as possible. You don't get a ton of meat off of it, but it's worth a little less effort.
Okay. So basically what's left now are the hindquarters, correct?
Yeah, the hindquarter. There's a few different ways. Sometimes guys will go up through it. They'll take all through the pelvic bone, all the way down, and then they'll take the bone off on the table. You can't do that. You can soften that, separate it, and bring it to your table and deal with it there. I don't like to deal with that on the table, only because that area, if somebody's broken urine bag, if pellets have been on it, droppings, I don't like to have that in there. So we move the hindquarters. I bone it out from the pelvic bone right off the hanger. And that's a little bit of an art. And it takes it's a process. If you have to, you start from the hind end up towards the tail area. And the pelvic bone will actually come in. It'll come out from that hind quarter, and then it sharply comes back in. So you have to follow that. And then you follow the pelvic bone all the way out, and you'll hit where the ball sits in the socket. And that'll pop right out. You got to get in there. You got to, separate it, open it up, and you'll start to see with the knife, it'll start to open. And there's a groove in there, and you get that knife in that groove. It's almost like opening a clam, and it'll pop. And you pop that off, and you have to follow. You have to follow that pelvic bone. It's hard to, say it on, radio without, somebody actually seeing it happen. A lot of times what's going to happen is you're going to cut it shy. And then when you get both of your hindquarters off, you're going to notice, okay, well, here's the pelvic bone and, meat on it, which isn't the worst thing in the world. You can just take it off. But from there on is how you're going to learn on how that configures, how the shape is. Once you learn it, done it so the second, sure, don't really do it. Sometimes I do have to canary it a little. Once you get into the grooves there, it's quite simple. Now, your pelvic bone is totally off. There's nothing to deal with. There's no meat on it. It's just floating the track.
Gotcha. Cool. So it's basically down to bone at that point. All right. Dusty, what other questions do you have before I get into some other particulars about the cuts?
Back to the cutting the hindquarters there. The best thing I can tell you is to get in and do one side. Once you get in there, you do it, and you start to cut in. If you make a mistake, learn from your mistake. It'll guide your knife around through there. If you take your time and you use let your knife feel its way, it'll guide you around through there till you get down to where that socket is, and then you pop that out and just keep working right with it. And at different angles, it's all about having your knife in there and getting used to the way that it needs to be cut. That pretty much the way Al said it there is the way I would do it. First getting started. Once you do so many, it becomes second nature, and you can kind of just float right around through there and right on the bone with your knife without gouging in to dull your knife, and it goes pretty good.
Gotcha. All right. So basically we've taken the whole deer apart. We've got the ribeyes, we've got the front shoulders, we've got the hindquarters, and we're basically left with the hindquarters and the front shoulders to process at this point. Is that correct, El?
Yeah. So now you're going to start with whatever you want to start with. You start with your shoulder, and basically you're deboning. So you're going to in the shoulder. In the shoulder, you're just going to follow you're going to follow the contour of the bone with your knife. That's all you're going to do. You follow that all along, the blade. Now, when you follow the blade along, and then you'll see you have to feel it out. Like Dusty said, you have to let your knife do the work. And once you get that all deboned out, what we do is with most of the shoulders is it's stew and it's ground. I mean, you can make shoulder steaks can be done if it's a big enough animal, but the membrane in there, it's really not an area we would do that. You can also make a nice shoulder roast out of it too.
Okay. So I should be thinking neck meat for burger. I should be thinking shoulder for stew meat and burger generally. Sometimes a steak if it's big enough. Sometimes a roast. Okay. What about the hindquarters? Right. Help me break down the hindquarters.
Well, the hindquarters, what you want to do is you want to flip them over and you want to debone them from basically, I go from the inside of the hind. You start at the ball and you just take your knife and you run it into the bone and you follow that contour of the bone. You'll go all the way back to the bottom part of the leg, where where your Achilles tendon, was located back in that area. You run back in that area there and you go around the bone. That's what you're doing. And once you get that off the bone, then that starts your portioning out. So what you're going to have left, though, too, is once that piece comes off, the shank will be less separate. You'll actually have the lower leg separated with just the bone of the upper leg. That's what's going to be sitting there. The rest of it's all deboned. You're going to follow that contour right down the knuckle where, it meets the lower leg. And that's where it gets a little tricky, but if you follow it, it'll roll right off. You're basically following the bone. Once it's deboned and that bone's off and you're sitting there and you got this big, chunk of meat, which is the hind quarter, boned out. Basically, the easiest way is to let that piece tell you how it's segmented. You get in there and you get membrane. You start nipping at the membrane, and you'll see the pieces, they'll start to unfold. And that's your biggest thing, and that's also a learning curve, because you can do it, and you might have two pieces that are still together, and then you'll realize, okay, you can use your hand to run through it or to separate it and, push on it and see, okay, where's this connected here? What's going to come out of that is you're going to have what's called your rump, which is, the butt end of the deer. That'll come out and it'll look almost football.
The football, exactly. I've seen. That's exactly how I would describe it. It's a football.
My mouth's watering.
Football shape, and once you get that down, then you'll see that you got three other, there's the top round, the bottom round, and then there's what's called the eye. The eye is going to be pretty much the smallest piece, and then again, that's going to look like, a smaller version of a tenderloin, if I can best describe it. That's actually one of the better parts of the hind quarter. Actually, that's one of the best. And if you can leave that whole, it's hard to describe it on radio. It depends on the size of the animal, but it'll be the smallest portion of the hind. The top round will probably be your biggest portion. It'll almost be square shape. It's thick. You got top, your bottom, and like I said, your eye. You'll see.
So it's like a bunch. It's like a group of, it's a puzzle basically of building blocks that are all parts of basically meat groups, right? And they'll start to separate as you start to get into a little bit more.
Yeah, it'll unfold. It'll unfold. And you'll see, especially if you get a book, a good butchering book, and you open it up, and you're looking at that while you're doing it, and then you'll start to see the pieces forming. Okay, this is this. This is that. A lot of the guys that I get, the biggest thing is they got no problem. They can bone out a deer. But one of the biggest things that was always said to me is it starts off well, but it all winds up being ground and do. Because once it gets cut into it, okay, now I've cut into it, and maybe they missed the portions out, and they just start cutting at random. Because once those pieces are out, then you physically you have to look at them and say, okay, this is what I could do with it. You're gonna go with the grain, or you're gonna go across the grain. How are you gonna make your pieces? We go with it because you can actually make steaks that look like they came out of a butcher case because the animal is small. You know what I mean? It's not where you could cross cut it and get big enough pieces off of it. If you do, you'll get small pieces. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But we were able to go, with the grain, and slice through that way there, almost like filleting it. Filleting the portions, and it's worked out well because then when you do cook them, they separate out, when you're eating them, and of course you cut across them, and then they.
And I'm gonna tell you this from experience from the past. When I first started cutting my iron, knowing the cut is a lot of key to doing your own processing. If you know what you're getting into before you cut it, it'll pop right into your head once you see it. I wish somebody had told me that when I first started cutting my iron. Because there's a lot more stuff got ground than it got cut up to what it should have been. But, I'll admit to that.
Right.
If you're doing it for your first time, do your research on it. And Al, I'm glad you said that because it helped me once I learned and figured out what all my cuts look like. Then I was able to get into a deer and actually pull all my, my front shoulder roast, my hind roast. I was able to cut all that out. And man, as a hunter, it makes you feel a whole lot better when you know what you're getting into. You know that you're doing the right cuts. You can visually see them. And when you put them in the freezer, you can mark them exactly what they are because you know.
Right. It's definitely a learning curve associated with this, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you got to, basically your thing is, read up what you can, get a book, visualize with it. Because we all learn by watching. We learn by doing, the hands-on. When you can take your animal from the field and put it on the table and say, hey, I did this, and this. It's rewarding. That's the fun. That's the part of hunting. It's not, okay, well, they went out and shot the deer now, I'm done. Everybody doesn't have the luxury to do it. They don't have, a place to do it. And that's all well and good. But if you could, it does. It's the best thing. It's like when you go hunting and we have spots where my buddy would say, "Oh no, man, what are you gonna do if you get a deer here? Look at it, it's all downhill." And I would tell him, "I'll worry about that when I get my deer. I'll be happy if I got fight deer. That's the best part. I got it down. I'll deal with the rest. It'll come out of here, no matter what I had to do." But the butchering part of
Now let's get into a little bit of the wrapping. Let's walk through the process that we're going to go to the freezer after we wrap. What's the proper method and proper materials to put your meat in the freezer with?
Well, there's a couple different ways you could do it. You could wrap it in paper, and you could also, what we use is a cellophane wrap, a wheat triple wrap. What we do is we portion everything out too. That's what you want to do. Okay, well, this is what I'm going to use for my family every time I make stew meat. We're going to use 1.5 pounds, a pound, 2 pounds, whatever. You portion all your stuff out. You want to wrap your steaks individually, of course. And you could wrap them in paper. You could vacuum seal them, which is awesome, I don't do much vacuum sealing being, having the business. It just wasn't efficient to spend the time doing that. I've cut them for guys and separated everything, and they've come over and, taken their meat and then they vacuum sealed it themselves. And if you have access to vacuum sealing, that probably actually be the best way to do it. I mean, if you don't have access to vacuum sealing and you want to wrap it, in freezer paper, that's very good. That's probably the most common way. What we've done, and we've held meat for 16. I got a moose that's been in the freezer since last October. It's the tail end of it. There's not much meat left, but it was butchered October, and we just had steak yesterday from it, and I got virtually no freezer burn or end process. We take and, like I said, we cellophane wrap it. It's a triple. It's wrapped 3 times over, and it's not that you have to wrap it once and then tear it off and wrap it again. You fold it. You fold it 3 times, even 4 times. Sometimes we're excessive. I got a buddy of mine. It's like, "What are you doing?" Even my own wife would help and say, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, that's how I want it." That's been the proven method that I've used, and just like anything else, it's been proven in the end. I've taken it out after 18, and it's still good. 16 months, 14 months. So we triple wrap it, and we'll put it into a Ziploc bag, a Ziploc freezer bag. And we lay the steaks down flat, and sometimes you can get 4 to 5 steaks with them on the size on that. We zip it, and we also push all the air out while we're doing it, and we get it nice and flat. And then we also mark the gate and what's in the bag. And we do that with everything. We do that with, our stew meat, our ground meat, wrap it into 1 pound, portions, cellophane wrap it, flatten it out and put it into bags. So that was another thing that really a lot of guys like, because when they brought it home, it's stacked in their freezer. It all stacked nicely. You know what I mean? Sure, if it's a roast or something like that, yeah, it's going to be, a little bulkier and then put on top. Also, what you could do too is what I do, and this is just getting a little more, tedious and probably you have to, is I'll take and separate my steaks, my stew meat. We're lucky enough to shoot a few deer a year, and I'll put that into a brown bag, and I'll stack up my steaks. Let's say I got 5 bags of steaks, 6 bags of steak. I'll stack them up, and I'll put them inside the brown bag, and I'll mark, and I stack it up in order so that they're just getting rotated. So I'm using my first. The first deer I shoot is the one on top. My last deer is, on the bottom. So it's rotated out. And the bags are marked, and I fold those over, and I put them in my deep freeze so that they're even more protected, But typically what we do is we do the triple wrap, and we portion everything out, and it's Ziploc, and it's dated, and marked. And that.
Gotcha. Seems like that would keep for a long period of time, and when you get it out and it's good and fresh and no freezer burn. That's the whole key to storing meat, to keep that freezer burn from getting to it.
We played through the years, and we found that was the most cost efficient and the best way to keep it as far as for a long period of time. Because typically, it depends on what fast you do eat, the meat, the venison. But typically, I like to have it so, I can get it a full year without a problem.
Gotcha. Al, I had a quick question for you. I see all kinds of formulas for this, but let's say I've got a 150 mature whitetail, 150-pound mature whitetail. How many pounds of meat should I get out of that deer?
Well, that's a great question you brought up, because I hear it all the time. And I've never had a problem, but I did in a couple of instances. It's a third of the field dress weight. Take or minus, it depends where the hit is. And this on my own deer. Times, several, and I've always come within that third. On that, you're probably gonna, you're looking at, 50.
Yeah, hanging weight. So you've taken out the guts. It's what you weighed it in at. It's hanging. Yeah, with the hide on. Yeah, 150-pound mature whitetail hanging in your cooler. I should expect 50 pounds of it.
You should expect 50 plus or minus, 5 to maybe even 7 pounds. Here's the biggest thing, and this is what I told people time and time again. If you want, I could give you more meat if you want garbage. I don't want garbage. The fat, the membrane, ligament, sinew, whatever you want to call it, that's what kills you.
What do you do with deer hair?
Well, you know what? It's that skinning process. That's where it's at. If you skin correctly and you take your time, you'll wind up with, you won't wind up with that amount of hair. What we do is we'll use the blades and a knife. If we got it on the table, let's say there's a few hairs on it, we never really had a problem with a lot of hair. If you're skinning the deer and you're cross-cutting through the hide, you want to go in the direction of the hairs when you're skinning, especially up the insides of the legs to where his Achilles tendon is, and then you're carving around that and pulling down. That's where you want to be careful. You want to take that nice slide up and then around the leg. You want to be that skinniest portion of the leg where you are. You know what I mean? Because that's when you start taking hair off. And then you want to flop that over. You want to keep, a hand on the hide. And as you're knocking it back, you're pulling back. You're pulling away from the meat. You're flipping that hide back. And once you're in that process, as long as you don't poke the hide, it'll roll off nice. That was another thing that I should have mentioned too. Is sometimes when guys are field dressing deer, they'll go a little crazy and we'll get a ton of hair. We'll get hair on, down inside of the hind quarters and stuff like that. But no, generally what I'll do is I'll scrape it with my knife. I'll run my knife off it. Let's say it's on the top round. I just run my blade right over it, and then I slide the blade actually through my fingers. Got to be careful, but it'll take a nice clean. Then, it's a clean towel or rag that you use every time that you clean in the bleach solution, and you can take that.
Gotcha. All right. So different techniques, got there.
Okay. We burn in Ohio, Jay. We do it with that. We seem to find that the whole key is a little propane torch is not hot enough, but the butane seems to burn a little hotter. And actually, when you hit that hair with that butane torch, it'll jump up as it singes. It jumps. It literally pops off the skin.
Right. Yeah. And the reason I asked the question in the first place, because you get handed down all these traditions, I don't know. I'm just being taught what I'm being taught. So I just never really know where it came from. Gotcha. Al, if you could share just a couple of, before we let you go, just share a couple of horror stories with us. You had, in our previous conversation, you had shared a couple of kind of gory messes that came in, and tell us about what happened and maybe some quick do's and don'ts.
Yeah, we had deer. What had happened in Connecticut was it was a deer that had a virus. The deer was sick. Can't tell you. I don't remember exactly what it was. And it was the nicest guy in the world that shot the animal. And they brought it in. They shot 2, same day. They were here within 12 hours. It was more than well cold enough out. They were hung in a garage for maybe 8 to 10 hours. The weather was cold enough. It was like in the mid-30s. Both deer were brought at the same time. I noticed an odor from one of the deer. So we took that deer, brought it into the cooler. And, I again asked gentlemen questions. So, he called me, and he's a friend of mine through the years of assessing, and called him. I smell it too. Oh, we proceeded to open it up. It looked fine on the outside. It really did. We didn't know where it was coming from or what it was. So I smelled it at the hind, with the hind quarters where he had, field dressed it, and he had actually sawed through the pelvic bone, and he took some of the hide off the inside of the hind quarter. Well, I took my knife and I cut into it, and it cleared everybody out of the cooler. That's so bad. And I have a strong stomach. I began to dry heat. We made a phone call. We didn't understand what was happening. BP informed us of what they believed it was, and that they would come and pick up the animal. And at that point, we put it in 3 mil bags, and it looked like a body when it left there. So picked it all up. But we didn't know what it was. We didn't know what we just walked into. I had knives and it touched it. It was in the cooler, but thank God there's no other deer there. The DMP informed me that it was nothing to worry about. It's just they wanted to investigate it more, and they replaced the tag of the animal. But that was...
Gotcha. Any parting thoughts, Al, before we let you go?
No, the only thing I could say, and I know that you had mentioned that another time that I talked to you about guys bringing what to look for if they're looking for a butcher, as far as burning their animal. One of the biggest things is, to make sure that they do have a walk-in cooler, because it could be around here. It was just last week we had days in the teens. And today it's 61 degrees. You can go from, it could be 20 degrees out, and then the next day it's 50. So, you might say, okay, well, but it is cold enough. You want to make sure, you don't want to be dropping your deer off to somebody who says, oh, well, I'm at work, put it by my picnic table. It's all well to use a home butcher because that's basically what I am. But, you want to make sure they have a walk-in cooler. And if you can, you want to go down there. When you bring your deer, go down there, poke around, say, I just ask some questions. Take a look at the facility. Ask them, questions, how do you run it? Sometimes you'll get a bulk bag. They'll put 5 pounds of stew. I've had it happen when, through my first couple of years. And that gets frozen. And now what? Now you got to thaw that out and then refreeze it. With a fresh meat, you can get away with it once, but after that, you really don't want to, be playing around. You don't want to do that if you don't have to. But they got to go and they got to ask questions. Make sure he has a cooler. If that animal's going to go, this is a big, very important thing because butchers get blamed for a lot of mistakes made on cates. Fortunately, I know how to cape, and I'm really nervous when I do cape. I spend a lot of extra attention. I don't like to do it, because I know that it can be done much quicker. Is get in touch with your taxidermist, get in touch with him, bring it to your taxidermist. That's part of his job, that part of what he does. Have him cape that deer. If you're going to a butcher for the first time or talk to him, make sure he knows how to cape it. Sometimes they don't. I lost an animal that I was going to have done because the guy was doing it under an old way that they used to do it. It was a neck mount. And he did it for that. You got to get all your ducks in a row. Really, when you're going to go out there, know your butcher, know where it's going, call ahead. Are you still open? Okay, what do I do if I get a deer? This is my predicament. I have nowhere to keep it. Get all your ducks in a row and have a backup. If that guy, for some reason, something happens, have a backup. But try to go look at the facility. When you get there and ask him questions, hey, how do you wrap it? Okay, take a look at his cooler, take a look at his his facility, what he's using. You got stainless steel tables. Is the place clean? Don't be afraid to ask questions because you're going to eat that. And if you spend all that time, in the field doing everything right, and then it gets brought there. And also we have places here that don't butcher, but they make sausage and they make kielbasa and they make all kinds of smoke goods. But you know what it is? When you bring your meat there, they don't use your meat separately. They bulk it all together and they do an average. So that's another thing you got to watch out for. You want, you spend all your time to take care of your animals. Somebody else may not have. You bring it there, and all of a sudden, you really don't have your own meat, or it's been all mixed together.
Gotcha.
So
good tips.
The most important thing is if you can take the time. And this is a pet peeve of mine because I see this and it really upsets me. It really upsets me. If you've got the time to go out and hunt, then you better have the time to make sure that animal is taken care of. It's not, I shoot the animal, oh, well, I got a deer, and after that, you throw it in your garage, and it's rotted 5 days later, because I've gotten calls. I've gotten a call from a person that hey, what should I do now? I had this deer hanging for 5 days. I'm like, it's been 70 degrees for the last 2. And they'll say, well, this is an actual phone call that I got. The guy said to me, Faye, do you think it's still good? It's green and it smells. We'll take a piece out of that was green and stunk, and would you go home and eat it? And all he said to me was, oh, I understand. And it made me so bad that he's not a bad person. That has nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with it. But you just ruined. Why'd you shoot the animal? Somebody else the shot. It didn't. You just got home, and those are a few of the things that really bother me. If you're going to take the time to hunt, and it starts from the top down, it's the same thing with equipment. You're going to take the time to go out and hunt. You better make sure you take the time to shoot your equipment. And the day before you're going to go out, you better make sure that it's spot on. And every time you get done hunting and you get out of there before you go back in again, you better shoot your equipment and make sure it's on because you don't know if you bumped something. I take it very personally. That's what I do. And that's why I like to make sure that, the guy's got to understand that. If that's not what you want to do, then don't go out and hunt. Don't say, well, you know what? I haven't shot my shotgun in 4 years, but hey, it's going to be a nice day out today. I think I'll go hunting. Right. And you grab your shell, go out and you start, maybe you're perfectly good, but maybe it's not. Then you go out there, find out, oh, I just wounded an animal. But anyway, that just, the key things, like I said, just, get all your ducks in a row. Make sure your butcher, you're on board with them. You know what you're going to do before the season begins. Take a look at the facility and, make sure there's a walk-in cooler and your emphasis is on cleanliness because that's what you want. And then you'll be happy,
Right.
from the get-go.
I think that's a good message, that prepping for deer hunting is also prepping for after the harvest. Like there's a whole other piece that you got to take into consideration and make sure you're ready for that too. Even though you may not get a deer every year, you should be ready to process it correctly.
I think in the end, it boils down to you're going to eat this. Take care of it.
Right. The animal deserves the respect, and you're going to eat it. So yeah, Al, you've been a great sport, but this has been awesome. Very informative. You're full of knowledge, and thank you for sharing it with us on our podcast for all of our listeners. And we're across the country. So, and I'm in New Hampshire, Dusty's in Ohio, and we have listeners as far as the West Coast. So this is going to be a fantastic podcast, and love to have you back again sometime.
Oh, that sounds great. I was very happy to do it.
Excellent.
Al, we sure do appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to getting you back on the Big Buck Registry Big Buck podcast in the future.
I don't know about you, Dusty, but that was probably one of the most informative podcast interviews we've ever had.
And it's awesome that he went into such detail that maybe it'll help a first-time processor cut up their own deer. And, that's kind of what this was all about, trying to help somebody get their own deer in the freezer from the field to the freezer.
Right. And it's there's definitely a learning curve involved in this. And I've, I didn't know anything in the beginning, but now I help other hunters who are less knowledgeable about it. But I wish I had this podcast in the beginning to learn a little bit more about how to get there, because it would have saved me some steps.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. It seems like it's a hands-on, I can't stress that enough. If you can get somebody that knows what they're doing with it to help you out first time, I suggest it. But if not, just dig into it. It's meat. You really can't mess it up.
Right.
It all grinds in the end. If you completely fail, and it's going to happen, you're going to make a wrong cut getting started. But it all grinds out to be burger if you completely mishap something, and that's okay.
Yeah. And hopefully this show helps you out if you've never done it before. If you've done it just a couple times and you want to just see if you're doing it right, hopefully this helps you out, this podcast. And I guess one of the biggest recommendations I would have is go find somebody that knows what they're doing and have them help you and watch and learn and actually help the process, because you'll be able to do it the next time. That's how I learned. And now I teach people how to do it. Not for a living or anything, but just because I like to help. I actually really enjoy butchering up my own meat.
Yeah, you're able to check out some different things that normally you wouldn't ever see by taking it somewhere, and it's a job. It really is. It's a lot of work. It takes some time. You can expect if you're going to do it on yourself, you're going to burn up half a Saturday trying to cut up the deer, and that's okay. It's an enjoyment, and getting your knife in there and figuring things out, it's really a technique that you can't really learn by watching. You got to get hands-on.
Right, exactly. You have to dig into this stuff because we do our best to describe it on the podcast, but it's a visual thing too. You really need to go watch and help and learn. But I'm glad he cleared up that whole question about how many pounds of meat should you get out of a dressed weight deer. That's always, everybody argues about that one.
Yeah, it seems like even here they argue the same point, that they think they should get back more meat. Well, yes and no. Some instances I can agree on. Others are just, it's ridiculous that people don't understand the waste that's there, what I should say. It's not really wasted meat, but there's a lot of tendons and gristle that you really don't want in your meat. So
yeah, do you want meat or do you want bubble gum? I mean, this is what
right.
it is.
Yeah, that you couldn't have said it any better.
That's exactly what it is. So
no, I got to talk about the smells and the odors. If you get into a deer and it's got a smell or odor, you need to have somebody professionally that knows what they're smelling or what they're seeing. Take a look at that deer before you cut it up.
The nose knows. If you start smelling things that smell like feet, dirty feet, or smells that are like dirty socks or sulfur, like an egg, a bad egg, don't.
There's a problem there.
There's a problem. The nose knows. The bacteria that grow on meat, the stuff that can really hurt you, have odors. You will smell these things. So if your meat is tainted, odor will tell the tale. So give it a good whiff. If it just smells like the meat you get out a fresh cut of meat that you get in your grocery store or whatever, that's the way you want it to smell.
It seems that a good location for an odor to start is in the hind legs, in between the hind rear legs. It seems like where the odor normally comes from in the esophagus area if you don't cut them all the way up the neck and pull the esophagus out.
Right.
One of them two areas is usually the starting point of an odor.
Yep. The esophagus has a tremendous amount of bacteria in it. So if it's warm enough temperatures, that bacteria will be released into the neck meats and things like that. That's one source of expansion of bacteria. And the other one is in the hindquarters, of course, where the stomach guts were. So both of those spots are absolutely right, Dusty. That's going to be your source of origin for tainted meat.
I keep coming back to the same thought I had while listening to it again. For all the changes we've seen in the hunting world over the last 13 years, the most important lessons really haven't changed very much at all. Today we have better equipment. We have better access to information. We have more resources for learning how to process deer. We have more scientific research, more wildlife surveillance, more awareness of chronic wasting disease, and more regulations surrounding the movement and handling of deer in certain parts of the country. And all of those things matter, but none of them replace the fundamentals. The fundamentals are still what determine whether a harvested deer becomes exceptional table fare or a missed opportunity. Respect the animal. Take your time. Keep things clean. Cool the meat properly. Pay attention to the details. Never stop learning. One of the things I appreciate most about this conversation with Al is that it reminds us that deer processing isn't simply the final step of a hunt. It's part of the responsibility that comes with being a hunter. Long after the excitement of the hunt fades, long after the photos are taken and the stories are told, what's left is the food that ends up on the table and the care that was given to the animal along the way. That's as true today as it was when this episode first aired. So as you prepare for another season, take advantage of the tools and information available today. Stay informed about current regulations, testing programs, and recommendations in your area. Continue learning, continue improving, but never lose sight of the fundamentals that experienced hunters and processors have understood for generations. Because in the end, great venison isn't the result of technology, it's the result of care.
And if you're enjoying the Evergreen series, do us a favor. Text it to a hunting buddy, post it on your story, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It helps more hunters find the show.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
I'm Jim Keller.
And I'm J. Scott Ammon. And thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunt Podcast. We can be found on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you would like to support us and our cause, please consider buying some merchandise off of our merch page by visiting www.bigbuckmerch.com. Catch you next time and good luck in the deer woods.
As we move on with hearts so strong, echoes of nature sing our song. In every rustle, a story's told of days gone by and hunts of old. Listening close to Deer Hunt by the Big Buck Registry, sharing tips and tales, it's where we ought to be.